Welcome back, everyone. This is Shields. Today, we got how London became the capital city of the world. If you're new here, we do humanities, history, all types of that type of content. We're glad you're with us. But today, we have this video, and I was just in London a couple weeks ago, actually, about a month ago. And this really is going to be an interesting discussion because this is a subjective claim, right? How London became the capital city of the world. What constitutes the capital city of the world of this claim? Being there just a month ago, I can tell you a lot of this is substantiated to maybe the culture, maybe it's like the melting pot of the world. I could see that. The hierarchy, the architecture, the history, the different peoples that lived here, the geography, how it's isolated, and I don't know. I just know that this video is going to be an interesting one, so sit back, relax, and let's listen to see how London became the capital city of the world.
London, the capital city of the United Kingdom, is home to approximately 8.9 million people.
And the metro area, there's like 14 million people too. So like London itself, like the city limits, I can see 9 million people. There's like 6 more million after that, or 5 or 6 more.
Nearly 40% of whom were born overseas.
Mm-hmm.
This makes the modern metropolis one of the most diverse and multicultural cities on the planet. Although you may think this accolade is a recent result of the globally interconnected world we live in today, London has surprisingly been home to a wide array of people from both near and far for the past 2,000 years. From the Romans to the Normans, from the Stuarts to the Victorians, London's unique position throughout history has seen it become the epicenter of
And we're gonna be doing so many videos about England just because I like doing history all over the world, but specifically England just because most of my um I guess my heritage and comes back from the English Isles. So it'll be more interesting for me to dive into that initially. Of course, we're going to do as much as we can worldwide, but I'm just so fascinated with Londinium, with the rise through, we would call it the Dark Ages, then the medieval times, that kind of complement that time, all the way into leaning out of total monarchy into more of a state of the British Empire and just everything all the way up to the modern times. It's just a fascinating country, a fascinating history. So I can see the argument already on the wall, but let's keep going.
empires, political movements, destructive conflicts, and cultural synergies. These have layered themselves upon one another over successive centuries, shaping the modern city.
I know, I'm going to pause. That is a beautiful little scenic walkway right there. Um, it kind of comes right by the Globe Theater, up on the left of this, and it's going right to, I think, the Tate Modern Museum. If you ever go, this is a perfect place to go right here, because this way is a museum that's free entry, and it has it has some hidden gems in there. And of course, the cathedral right there.
Today. But how did London grow from a small provincial town into one of the largest and most renowned metropolises on the planet? This is how London became the capital city of the world. The city that would one day become the mega metropolis of London owes its existence to the arrival of the Romans in Britain almost 2,000 years ago. When the legions invaded the island in the year 43 AD, they constructed a defensive settlement on the northern side of the River Thames, naming it Londinium. Like most cities founded by the Romans, it was strategically situated at the narrowest point of the river that allowed for the construction of a bridge, thereby connecting it to the wider road and sea route network.
Now, this is also an educational video for me. I'm not Mr. London. So is this the London Bridge? I can't imagine it is the London Bridge, right? This got to be like something that's made out of wood and no longer stand.
Works of the empire.
It is a painting or a
The
drawing.
initial settlement of Londinium was small and remained vulnerable to attack. Just over a decade after its founding, a massive armed rebellion, led by the Celtic Queen Boudica against Roman rule, swept across the greater southeastern portion of the country in 60 AD, resulting in the complete destruction of Londinium, as well as the other major Roman settlements of
Moldium. Yeah, I don't know about it. Verlamium. But these are big places too.
Camulodunum and Verulamium. After the sack of the city and Queen Boudica's subsequent defeat by the Roman legions, Londinium was gradually rebuilt as a planned town. A forum was constructed sometime in the 80s AD, and it soon boasted many other major public buildings, including the largest basilica built north of the Alps, as well as numerous temples, bathhouses, an amphitheatre, as well as a large fort for the city's garrison.
So I'm guessing a lot of the architecture, I mean, most of this is not standing. There's the original Roman wall. I think that's like at 200 AD, something like that, which is probably around this time, right? There's parts of that still standing. I don't know or remember if there's anything else in the city area that still stands.
By the turn of the 1st century, Londinium
Besides
was home
artifacts.
to as many as 60,000 people, and had replaced Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, as the provincial capital of Britannia. Sometime between 190 and 225 AD, it was decided to build a defensive wall around the city
The London
to
Wall.
protect its inhabitants from future attacks.
Knew it.
The London Wall would define the city's perimeter for many centuries to come, and incorporated 6 of the 7 historical gates of the city: Ludgate, Newgate, Aldersgate, Cripplegate, Bishopsgate, and Aldgate, with only Moorgate being added later in medieval times. By the 5th century, however, the Roman Empire was in rapid decline, and the year 410 marked the departure of the last Roman legion from Britain.
Oh, so you don't have security anymore. You have to fend for yourself.
Bringing an end to nearly 400 years of Roman occupation of the island. With this withdrawal, the city of Londinium was largely abandoned by the end of the century. It was only with the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons in Britain that the city of London was...
Here we go. That's where the Anglo-Saxon culture starts coming in. Also the Jutes. Okay, so the Jutes as well.
Given a new lease of life. Just to quickly pause for a moment and let you know that making these videos involves a lot of work on our side. From researching, script writing and animation, to editing and final composition. Although this is very much a passion project and something we truly love doing, it can, like any kind of work or aspect of modern life, take its toll on our mental health. There have been times when the pressure of meeting deadlines have left us to make comfortable sort of access like your know at the start this first the North Sea therapy. When these Germanic tribes migrated across the North Sea from what is now northern Germany and Denmark in the 5th and 6th centuries, they initially left the abandoned Roman city as it was and focused on constructing their own settlement named Ludenvik.
So the Saxons got there first?
To the west of the Roman walls, in the area around what is now Covent Garden. By the late 7th century, it had a population of around 10,000 people.
Is this actually such an interesting, like, it almost looks like a downgrade, doesn't it, guys? Like, it almost looks like a downgrade. Now, this is not a historical photograph. This is a drawing based off of passed down literature, passed down signs or artifacts. This almost looks like a step down from the Roman architecture and builds. I think it was.
And was home to a flourishing port, as well as the first iteration of St. Paul's Cathedral, which was founded by the first post-Roman bishop of London, Mellitus, in the year 604. The presence of a Christian place of worship in the city helped promote the conversion of the pagan Anglo-Saxon peoples to Christianity in the decades that followed. However, by the 9th century, the prosperous trading centre and the religious treasures housed in Ludenvik began to attract the attention of other pagan peoples from overseas, who were bent on seizing this wealth for themselves. The Viking Age in Britain began with the well-documented raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793, and shortly
We're already in the top of the 8th century.
afterwards,
Okay.
other treasure-laden centres of worship across the British Isles had fallen victim to their attacks. London was no exception, recording its first Viking raid in the 830s. These raids increased in number and intensity over the following years, until the Vikings switched tactics from raiding to invading. In the year 871, London was occupied by the Great Heathen Army, which purportedly camped within the old Roman walls. By 886, the city had been retaken by English forces under the leadership of Alfred the Great,
Here we go.
who ordered that the Saxon settlement of Ludenvik be moved back within the old Roman city walls. The fortifications were subsequently rebuilt, as was the bridge that crossed the River Thames, and the settlement was renamed as Lundenburg.
It's just interesting how language just continues to evolve. Londinium, and then Lunderbruth, London. Was it London? It wasn't always London. I guess it was Londonwick. My bad. So Londonwick, and then finally Londonborough.
The city's size and commercial wealth meant that it steadily grew in importance over the following centuries, although it faced competition for political prominence from the traditional Anglo-Saxon capital of Winchester. Despite suffering further Viking attacks in the 10th and early 11th centuries, London remained intact. Upon the orders of King Edward the Confessor, it became a new centre for royal power, with the foundation of Westminster Abbey. The church was completed around 1060 and was
So close to the Norman Conquest.
consecrated shortly before Edward's death in January 1066. Westminster Abbey then became a focal point for royal religious ceremonies in the country, with Edward being the first of 18 monarchs to be buried within the church, and his successor, King Harold Godwinson, becoming the first of 40 kings and queens to be coronated in the same building.
Wow, didn't know that.
The year 1066, however,
Here we are.
would mark a pivotal moment
William.
in London's history, as well as that of the wider country. The Norman Conquest of England was launched by Duke William of Normandy in response to what he perceived as the wrongful succession of King Harold Godwinson to the English throne. Believing himself to be the rightful heir, William invaded England, defeated Harold's Anglo-Saxon army at the Battle of Hastings, and then marched on London to have himself crowned as the new king in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066.
That's just such a savage mode type thing to do.
Under the new Norman regime, fortresses were built across the country to suppress the native population.
That is just an insane military complex move right there. If that was happening that quickly in terms of this spread out.
And within London itself, several new fortifications were constructed. The
Tower of London?
most prominent of these was situated at the eastern end of the city, where an initial timber fortification was replaced with the first ever stone castle in England. From that point onwards, the Tower of London, as it became known, would
Such a beautiful place. I mean, a crazy storied past. Go to London, you have to go to the Tower of London. So much history within those walls. So much history within those walls. It's insane.
be greatly expanded over the following
1,000
decades
years
and
of
centuries,
history.
serving as a bastion of royal power that was projected across the city and country as a whole. At this point, London was by far the largest and most important city in England, though it was not yet considered to be the nation's capital. Winchester retained this honorary title,
Interesting.
as most institutions associated with royal power
Kind of like New York before DC? Maybe?
remained situated there. It was only after a fire destroyed much of Winchester in the 11th century that the royal offices relocated to London. A
Circumstance.
further strengthening of the city's royal connections occurred in 1097, when
But such a well-placed city, right, on the River Thames. Like, such a well-placed city.
King William II began the construction of Westminster Hall, originally intended as a residence for the king, rather than as a meeting place for Parliament. London's development accelerated rapidly during the medieval period, with its population rising from
What an insane drawing. Someone drew this. Insane.
15,000 in 1100 to well over 80,000 by 1300.
Wow.
Aside from its predominantly native-born population, the city was home to several foreign communities, including French wine traders, Flemish textile merchants, as well as Danish and German seafarers.
Yeah.
A sizable Jewish population also resided in the city, having settled there after their entry into the country following the Norman Conquest around 1070.
And when are the Crusades? Because that might have, I mean, I might be totally ignorant here because I don't really know too much about the Crusades, but would that also incentivize migration?
Most of London was still confined within the city walls at this time, though the area south of the river, known as Southwark, was also growing in importance. Passage over the river had been made possible by a wooden bridge that existed in various forms for centuries.
The London
But
Bridge.
in 1176, the timber bridge was replaced with a more permanent stone structure. Upon its completion in 1209, the new London Bridge had a gatehouse at its southern end and was lined with houses on either side, which rose several stories high.
Can you imagine you live on a bridge? Can you imagine you live on a bridge? That would be crazy.
And protruded over the river. For over 600 years, it remained the only way to cross the River Thames
That is insane.
on foot. London's development
So you know those houses are being, I mean, how much foot traffic relative to how many people are alive in the city at this time? Gotta be an insane percentage.
was not only marked by physical construction, but also by the establishment of its political institutions. The first recorded mayor of the city, Henry Fitz-Aylwin, took office in 1189, and the city's right to political representation was confirmed in the Magna Carta, signed by King John in 1215. This formally declared London's unique,
Which I think there's 3 original copies in England still. Pretty sure. I think there's 1 in London. There's 1 somewhere I don't remember. There's 1 in Salisbury.
privileges, separating it from the rule of the rest of the country, and ensuring its independent governance by its own citizenry, rather than by royal power. London's fierce protection of its independence was largely motivated by the valuable trade that flowed through its markets. Almost all of England's wealthy merchants lived in London, and they, along with the craftsmen who supported their businesses, organised themselves into guilds. These guilds regulated their respective trades and ensured consistent standards across various professions. The oldest of these, the Weavers' Company, was granted a royal charter in 1155, and over the years many other guilds were incorporated, including the mercers, brewers, goldsmiths, ironmongers, butchers and plumbers, among many others. Despite the prosperity on offer,
The plague, right? Is this the bubonic plague? Am I off by a lot here?
the tightly packed, winding streets of the city were hotbeds for disease, the most destructive of which struck London in 1348. The Black Death decimated the population,
Black Death is the second bubonic plague, right?
and at its height, killed 200 Londoners every day.
Dang.
The city
For just the, I don't know how many people was in London at this time, but that's gotta be, like, that would be a huge difference. If like 200 people a day were in London died today, it would pale in comparison of the percentage that it was taken each day there. 50% mortality rates.
City's dense population was also prone to breakdowns in social order. There were countless riots and rebellions during the Middle Ages, but none was more prominent than the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. This saw an army of several thousand country folk march on London to protest against the exorbitant tax rates imposed upon them. The uprising led to the ransacking of the city, during which many opulent buildings were destroyed and government officials killed.
Wow. We need to learn a little bit more about the Peasants' Rebellion.
Law and order was difficult to establish in medieval London. Although there
This literally looks like inside one of the buildings adjacent to Tower of London. I might be off.
There were several jails in the city for imprisoning those suspected of committing crimes. There was no police force yet established to prevent crime in the first place. Instead, a system of deterrence was employed to show criminals what would happen should they be caught.
That's where you get all these different torture devices.
Those convicted of lesser crimes might be placed in the stocks or pillories, but for those convicted of the most serious crimes and sentenced to death, they were taken to one of the city's execution grounds at Tyburn, Smithfield, or Tower Hill to meet a grisly end in front of a large, jeering crowd. The dawn of
Welcome to Henry VIII.
the 16th century and the accession of the Tudor dynasty to the English throne marked a significant turning point in London's history, as it became one of the largest and most important cities in the world. Some of the earliest cartographic representations of London emerged during this time, illustrating the growing scale and development of the city. The Flemish artist Anton van den Wingarde produced a panoramic image of London in 1543, showing that the city had begun to expand beyond the confines of its walls, particularly westwards, towards the centre of governmental power in Westminster. The city's population also boomed during this period, quadrupling from 50,000 in 1530 to over 200,000 by 1603.
That's insane. That is insane. How much is that migration? How much is that population boom?
This growth was largely due to London's increasing importance as a centre of commerce, which attracted people from across the country with the allure of higher wages and the potential to make a fortune.
Opportunity.
London's trading connections similarly expanded beyond its immediate neighbours in Western Europe to further afield, including Russia, America, Africa, and India. Many merchants organised themselves into trading companies, such as the Muscovy Company and the East India Company, which accelerated the adoption of capitalism.
So this is where a lot of colonialism starts to take place.
And lay the groundwork for the English and later British Empire, which would spread to every corner of the globe. When Tudor Londoners were not making money, they were busy spending it in the city's numerous entertainment establishments. Inns, taverns, and brothels had existed for many centuries already, but the most defining cultural offering to emerge from this period was the theatre. Initially confined to galleried coaching inns and the houses of the upper classes, plays became so popular and successful that dedicated theatres.
And I mean, I'm going to keep interjecting when things are relevant to things I did, but went to an actual Shakespearean play in the Globe Theatre. That's what I think is kind of, maybe this is what it's playing off of right here, the Globe Theatre. It's again, you're in London, go to Globe Theatre, watch a Shakespearean play.
Were built. In 1574, the city banned any such establishments within its walls, prompting their construction on the outskirts. The most famous of these was the Globe in Southwark.
The Globe Theatre. Ugh. I said the circus. I don't know what I'm thinking. But yeah, let's back up a little bit.
74, the city banned any such establishments within its walls, prompting their construction on the outskirts. The most famous of these was the Globe in Southwark, which hosted many of the era's most influential and famous works produced by William Shakespeare. As the Tudor period gave way to that of the Stuart era, with the death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603, London began its transition into becoming a modern city. Though this transformation was only made possible through the occurrence of several severely disruptive political and social events during the 17th century. The first of these came about in 1605, when a group of discontented English Catholics attempted to blow up King James I and his government during the state opening of Parliament on the 5th of November. Although the plot was uncovered, with the discovery of Guy Fawkes surrounded by barrels of gunpowder in the basement of the building, the subsequent trial and execution of the conspirators in Westminster set the tone for the other bloody events that were to follow. When King James I's son, Charles I, inherited the throne in 1625, he quickly alienated many members of Parliament with his increasingly autocratic rule, which eventually boiled over into a bitter civil
war, and then we get the famous trial, then we get Oliver Cromwell, and it's just going to start to, it feels like there's not going to be any more monarchy for a little bit, but then we get right back to it. Here we go.
War erupting throughout the country in 1642. London's inhabitants quickly declared themselves in favour of the parliamentarian cause and constructed a ringwork of fortifications around the city to protect it from a royalist attack. Yet within a few years, the tide had turned in Parliament's favour, and King Charles I was captured and tried for treason. On the 30th of January 1649, he was executed outside the banqueting house in London, with his head being removed with one fell swoop of the executioner's axe. In the decade following this, London remained the political centre of the country, although it was now governed as a republic until the monarchy was restored in 1660, with King Charles II being crowned inside Westminster Abbey in the following year. London, nevertheless, remained a dangerous and volatile place, for it was struck by plague in the year 1665, which claimed the lives of a staggering 60,000 people. To make matters worse, in the following year of 1666, a great fire swept through the city and destroyed the greater part of it, confined within the old medieval walls.
Such a horrible couple years right there.
In the fire's aftermath, building regulations were introduced, and the city was reconstructed largely in stone.
The good things came from that.
And brick. Much of this process was carried out under the auspices of the era's famed architect, Sir Christopher Wren, who rebuilt St. Paul's Cathedral and 52 other churches within the city, as well as a monument to the fire itself,
which is a place you can go visit to today,
which remains standing to this day. Further construction saw the development of the West End of London, which formed the new playground for the aristocratic elite, who built mansions, theatres and coffee houses in areas like Covent Garden and St James's. This cemented the separation of the more exuberant upper-class area surrounding the royal court in Westminster and the middle-class mercantile city of London, which toward the end of the 17th century housed the headquarters of the Bank of England, the East India Company, and the insurance firm Lloyd's of London, all of which played an instrumental role in supporting the international trade that flowed out of the city's expanding docklands to the east. With the dawning of the
What an insane picture right here.
18th century, London's population had swelled to 500,000 people. A sizable minority of these formed London's growing immigrant communities, comprising not only of other Europeans like the Irish and Jews, but also those from further afield like Africa, the Caribbean and Asia. The city's continuing expansion bore witness to some of London's most iconic landmarks coming into existence
The
during this
Elizabeth
period.
Tower?
10 Downing Street became the official residence of the Prime Minister in 1732, with Robert Walpole being the first to reside in the building, and Buckingham Palace was purchased by George III and remodelled as a royal residence in 1761.
I'm just thinking, yeah.
More bridges were also built over the Thames to ease the congestion on London Bridge,
Finally!
with Westminster Bridge opening in 1750 and Blackfriars Bridge opening in 1769. By the time the 19th century arrived, London had become the largest city in the world and was home to over 1 million people, although this would grow to 6.7 million by the end of the century. The Industrial Revolution played a large part in the expansion of the metropolis, as people from the countryside flocked into the city in search of work.
More opportunity.
Many, however, would be forced into overcrowded, poverty-stricken slums, the likes of which were
Victorian age was not a pretty sight for working conditions.
immortalized in Charles Dickens's novel Oliver Twist. As the city's population rose, so did its crime rate, and in 1829, the then Home Secretary and future Prime Minister Robert Peel established the Metropolitan Police, which would serve the entire urban area.
The Bobbies.
Over the following
this is the Jack the Ripper image right here.
decades, the force would become involved in solving some of London's most notorious crimes, such as the case of Jack the Ripper, who terrorized the...
Well, they didn't solve it. They didn't solve it. Whole case, technically.
East End in the late 1880s.
Mm-hmm.
The most
The National Rail Yard!
transformative aspect of London during this time came with the arrival of the railways. This spurred the massive outward growth of the city, as a network of tracks connected the developing middle-class suburbs around London to the main railway termini of the city centre, such as Euston, Paddington, Waterloo, King's Cross, and St Pancras, which in turn were linked by the underground tube network. In 1851, London hosted the Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace, which showcased the technological and cultural marvels of the age. The fair was a huge success, attracting 6 million visitors from across the world, and promoted Britain at the
So many antiquities in this room right here.
height of its imperial dominance. Other notable London landmarks were constructed during the 19th century.
The National Gallery Museum right here in Trafalgar Square.
Such as Trafalgar Square, Big Ben, the Houses of Parliament, and Tower Bridge.
Tower Bridge. What an insane feat of steel that was, building that bill. And it's a drawbridge too. And the mechanisms of steam power and everything is insane.
However, despite the pomp and opulence that London was portraying to the world, the city itself remained a dirty and unsanitary place for most of its inhabitants. Frequent outbreaks of cholera struck during this period, and in 1858, the River Thames, which had always been used to carry away the city's sewage and industrial waste, reached breaking point and produced a smell so terrible that contemporaries described it as the Great Stink. A solution to the city's filthy problem was proposed by civil engineer Joseph Bazalgette, who organised the construction of a modern sewer system to move London's waste far downstream to the east.
Nice.
This brought an end to the cholera outbreaks, and his actions are thought to have saved more lives than the efforts of any other Victorian official.
Really cool.
The city's most drastic and irreversible changes, however, would occur in the 20th century, when it was forced to face the social, economic, and political fallout from two of the world's most destructive conflicts. The First World War saw London experience its first aerial bombing raids, carried out by German Zeppelins and later by aeroplanes. These air raids killed around 670 people and caused great terror among London's population. Although a far greater impact of the war
The Blitz.
was felt in the number of Londoners who were killed in combat, with about
Wow.
124,000
We're not there yet.
men never returning from the front. The Second World War, which broke out some 20 years later, wrought even more unimaginable destruction on the city. In anticipation of air raids from the German Luftwaffe, thousands of London's children were evacuated to the countryside to escape the bombing, and the citizens who remained behind in the city were forced to hide in homemade bomb shelters or
Or the underground.
underground stations. The heaviest bombing took place during the Blitz between September 1940 and May 1941, when London was subjected to 71 separate raids, with over 18,000 tons of high explosive being dropped. The City of London itself and the adjacent docklands were the main targets of the German bombers, which destroyed many commercial, industrial, and historic buildings. However, somewhat remarkably, St. Paul's Cathedral survived.
I don't think it's remarkably because this technology had gotten really precise. I am pretty sure through some accounts that I've learned through the Luftwaffe, that's how you say it, commands do not hit certain targets because everyone knew that there was going to be an end point of the war, whether it be peace or resolve or takeover. You're not going. There's like lines you don't cross no matter what, unless it got to that point. So there was no way they were going to hit specifically Buckingham Palace, specifically, the Elizabeth Tower, specifically the cathedrals. Like, not necessarily, but I've heard accounts that they have specifically avoided doing stuff like that.
Unscathed. By the end of the war, some 30,000 Londoners had been killed by the bombing, and hundreds of thousands were made homeless. The post-war years saw London transform into the city that it is today. The overcrowded Victorian housing, much of which had been damaged during the war, was pulled down to make way for new developments. Additionally, new waves of immigrants began to arrive in the city, with many coming from the dominions of the British Empire.
Like India specifically, because I think, yeah, the British had colonial rule for some time.
Adding a new cosmopolitan and multicultural dynamic to the streets of the capital. The city also bore witness to a cultural revolution in the 60s, as London became the centre of a worldwide movement exemplified by the swinging 60s,
The Rock,
made famous by the success of British musicians such as the Beatles and
the
the Rolling
Stones.
Stones. As the new millennium dawned, London in the 21st century established itself as truly being one of the world's greatest and most influential cities. Almost every nationality and language is now represented within the metropolis, which is undoubtedly a direct result.
And in terms of culture, like I think of like Anthony Bourdain, you can't have culture without food. You're a foodie. You can pretty much get every single cultural food in the city, whether it be American, German, Indian, Vietnamese, Chinese, you name it. You name it. That's what's so interesting and cool. It's so cool.
Of the past 2 millennia of history, drawing people from all walks of life to its streets in search of the opportunities that can be found there.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, you have to go to London once in your lifetime if you have never been, just to experience, the culture, the royal history, the country's history, the geography, the just there's just so much. There's just so much to do there. And so much to do there in terms of modern times, as well as visit the museums and look around and see what it has to offer. Um, yeah, great video. I think we all have a little bit more of a rounded knowledge of London and how it really shaped over the last 2,000 plus years. Um, if you made it this far, I implore you to hit that subscribe button so we can watch more content together. Let me know if you have a specific video you want me to react to. But until next time, peace out. Bye bye.